Good morning. As I always say, it is very good morning. And today, I'd spent almost 20 years being involved in Christian contemporary music. And during that period of time, and since that period of time, I've had a lot of understanding, a lot of convictions in my heart about what all went on during that period, that very period of time. Some say that I was a pioneer of that whole movement, one of the pioneers. The truth is, I was nothing more than a false prophet, leading people astray into my very love, which was rock and roll at that period of time. I grew up, uh, during the 60s. I grew up during the whole rock movement that was going on. And so it's no wonder that all that constant things came into my life and actually started coming out of my life. I grew up in a little town. Well, it wasn't little. It's a town called Allentown. It was just north of Philadelphia. During that period of time, American Bandstand was like the venue for secular rock and roll artists to come and play and be a part. So Allentown, being close, got all the bands to come the night before or the night after. So I was totally involved in seeing all these bands. I was totally involved hearing all this music. The the I pretty much went to all the rock concerts during that my late teens and early 20s. Uh, I saw them all. I was, deeply involved in drugs and alcohol and all types of things. And so I would go to those concerts and I'd be totally wiped out. And the whole time I was at those concerts, those musicians were putting their spirit of what they were, that spirit of rock and roll, that demonic roots of that rock and roll was just coming into my life. I was one of the unsuspecting, like I said, young people who, experienced marijuana, experienced, LSD early. I mean, the groups would sing songs like "With a Little Help, My Friends," which was nothing more than saying, "Here's help to get marijuana." With "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds" was nothing more than talking about LSD, which eventually was one of my greatest downfalls because it started to destroy my life. I was one of the unsuspecting young people, again, that was lured into drug use, in those subtle lyrics that were coming, but they weren't always that subtle, and those subtle lyrics really, after all the drugs and everything and the mind control of the drugs, the devil used it, and he used it very strongly by imparting that demonic philosophy, and he piped it into all of us, as it can be said. He was piping that music very strongly into us. Names like Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey and others from the dark side began showing up on album covers, and their philosophies really began to show up in all these artists' lyrics and their messages and their dress and their attitudes. So it's no wonder it just started to come, at us. But we didn't really understand anything other than it was just music. And there was a song back then, and it pretty much states it as it is. It says, "After all, it's only rock and roll, and I like it." But it wasn't just like, it was love. And the devil pounded that love into us. He pounded it deep into us. He pounded it even into our bones, so it became so much part of who we really were. And we were, as it says in Ephesians 2:2, we were following the course and the fashion of this world. We were under the sway, the tendency of this present age, following the prince of the power of the air. We were obedient to and under the control of demon spirits. that still constantly work in the sons of disobedience, the careless, the rebellious, and the unbelieving who go against the very purpose of God. That was us. We were controlled by demon spirits. I mean, you're walking around full of drugs. I mean, you're sitting there watching some of them, these artists that eventually, I went to several concerts. After the concert was over, the artist went and did another concert, and then the next thing he died of an overdose, or she died of an overdose, or he, it was, they were like 26, 27 years old. They were falling out because the devil was totally destroying them. He was destroying us. And we sat there listening to all this. This was the demonic roots of rock and roll. There were many occult bands in the 60s. And those occult bands really, those satanic occult bands really, in the end, began to influence rock and roll even in a whole other direction. And not just rock and roll, but it really set the tone for all the new heavy metal that was then to come. So then when the Jesus movement came along in the 60s and 70s, the people began to escape. The hippies began to come out. I don't know that I was a hippie, but I was pretty close. So the hippie movement came out of that culture, though, with all kind of baggage. We were full of demonic roots of rock and roll. We still loved rock and roll. That's as simple as it was. We created a whole new counterculture with our music, and so much of it was nothing more than the same music, but with Christian type lyrics. And those demonic roots that were the very core of rock and roll music were still enslaving each of us. Galatians 4:9 probably says it best. He says, however, since you have come to know the true God through personal experience, or rather to be known by God, how is it that you are turning back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of religion and philosophy to which you want to be enslaved all over again? We were just going right back to it. I remember, God so delivered me from drugs and so delivered me from, so much of that. Yet, in the midst of it, in the very beginning, I traveled with an evangelist. And, rock music was far from me then. I didn't listen to it. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. Wasn't part of it. But someone all of a sudden gave me a couple cassettes. And those cassettes was Christian contemporary music. And I started to listen to it. And it stirred that same feeling. It stirred that feeling to want my love. I loved that rock and roll. And I really then all of a sudden jumped in full. It became part. But it was just like, if you think about the Israelites, Aaron gave away his priestly authority. He built the golden calf, for the Israelites. And he allowed the Israelites to worship and celebrate in pagan ways. That's what he did. The pastors of the 60s and 70s, they gave away their altars to the musicians and the artists, and that did not truly understand the difference between the holy and the profane. Hey, no one taught us. We didn't understand. We didn't know what was holy, what was profane. We just know we liked music. We liked we loved music, and the devil used it. He knew how to get into us. He knew what those entrances were, and he used that music. But it says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, he says, therefore, if any person is engrafted in Christ, the Messiah, he is a new creation, a new creature altogether. The old previous moral and spiritual condition has passed away. Behold, the fresh and new has come. We didn't fully understand that. But that's what God wanted us to be. He wanted us to come out. He said, music in many ways was and is no different than the drugs we took, with its addicting power, which is the very demonic root that is in rock and roll. Satan knew what he was doing when he created rock and roll. He knew what kind of a tool it could be. He knew it could enslave the youth all over the world, and it did. It did. 2 Corinthians 6:17 says, "Come out from among unbelievers and separate yourselves from them, says the Lord, and touch not any unclean thing. Then I will receive you kindly and treat you with favor." You know, we didn't really understand that. We weren't coming out. That was a command. That wasn't like, hey, it might be good if you did this. That was a command to come out. And we weren't. I remember in the, I think it was in the 70s or 80s, there came out a comparative music chart. And the comparative music chart was, here's the secular rock band full of the demonic roots of rock and roll, and here is a band in the Christian contemporary music market, and they're so much like each other. So if you like this band, you should like this band. How sad was that? I mean, all we're doing was pointing everybody, no, go back there. Go back where you came from, and become enslaved again to the very thing that had enslaved you, originally. Why would we want to compare ourselves to that? Why would we want to copy their styles? Why would we want to have anything to do with it? I was right there in the middle. I had 3 record companies, and they were different types of record companies. I had companies that basically recreated my idols. I had the platform to do it. There was music I always loved. And so the music that I always loved, it became the music that I released in the contemporary Christian music. You could almost look at the bands and see the bands, and you can almost say, well, that name is obviously a copy of this. Oh, yeah, well, that person is obviously a copy of this. Yes, that person is obviously a copy of this. I mean, it's sad. We weren't separating ourselves from unbelievers, as the verse commands, which can be witnessed by the way the whole contemporary Christian music scene, including myself, imitated those worldly counterparts. We imitated them. We acted like them. We tried to show, them, just like us. The music, their worldly appearance, their album covers, and even the lifestyles that we had accepted and maintained. We copied them all the way down to the drum sounds. I mean, we bring albums in and listen to the albums and copy the sounds and try to, recreate those very sounds. There was nothing original about it. We weren't original. There was no righteousness in God about it. We were not hearing God. We were hearing, and we were, as it says in Ephesians, we were following the course and the fashion of this world. We were under the sway and the tendency of this present age. There was no righteousness of God. 1 John 3:10 says, By this the children of God and the children of the devil are clearly identified. You can be clearly identified by who you are and how you act and the way you look and what you think you are. It says, anybody who does not practice righteousness, who does not seek God's will in thought, action, and purpose, is not of God. You're of the devil if you don't. The devil becomes your friend. You can't be a friend of the devil and serve God. You just can't be it. You become clearly identified by who you are. There was a song that became very synonymous with the whole Jesus movement back at that period of time. And the name of the song was, Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music? Did God not, didn't he create the heavens? Didn't he create all things? Couldn't he create a sound? And he did. Couldn't he create a sound that was acceptable, holy, and righteous. And he did. And it was there. But we chose the devil's music. Why would we want to do and listen and think that the devil's music was better than anything God could create it? I mean, to say that is so... Why should the devil have all the good music? It wasn't good music. It was a total door into our lives. It was a total door that exposed those roots of rock and roll for who we really were. Constantly, Christian contemporary musicians were trying to look like, sound like, perform like the world's secular artists. And when they were unable to create what they wanted, they would just bring in secular musicians and recreate the sound. And then put Christian type lyrics to it and think that they had a whole new way of reaching people. 1 Kings 18:21 says this. I mean, this was Elijah, when he was dealing with the prophets of Baal. And so much of us were prophets of Baal, in truth. And he said, Elijah came near the people. And God's coming near to you right now and saying the same thing. How long will you halt and limp between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people did not answer him with a word. So many folks that are involved in this kind of music, they don't answer with a word, or they fight it, or they come to say, oh no, that's not true. He's just another radical. He's saying all these things. I'm not another radical. I lived it. I was part of it. I lived it for 20 plus years. I thought I was right. I thought I was totally right in everything I was doing. I wasn't right. A great portion of us in the Christian music believed that it was necessary to become like the people, trying to reach them so they could hear and understand the message. You thought, obviously, we created music. I created a heavy metal label. I created an alternative music label. I created a jazz label. What? So you thought you could reach the people. You thought you were building a bridge into a rock culture or into a, alternative culture. You thought that bridge was, being built. You never understood. And after years of seeing what happened, I never understood that bridge went two ways. And that what was happening was the very cultures that we were reaching out to try to pull people out of started to find its way across that bridge back into the church, back into the youth of that church. And they became the very same things that we were trying to help people come out of. They became the headbangers. They became the Mohawk people. They became, they became the wickedness that was so spread around America. They became what Satan wanted. He got into that door and he started pulling them out of the very places where they were. I was totally deceived. I kept believing you needed to cross over. You may not understand what that means, but here we are. We were in the Christian music. And we kept wanting to say, we need to take this music and cross over into the world. We wanted to make our place. We wanted to make a statement in the world. And we thought, oh, this would be great, to take our music into the world venues and into those markets. But I began to see what happened. I did a concert. We did a concert that was we did many things in this process during this period of time that we thought were, new ways, they pioneering ways into doing things. Little did we know we were walking into trap after trap after trap after trap. I did a concert in Hollywood on Sunset Strip at a place called the Roxy. Two of the bands, a band and one of the artists that I had played, and we promoted, and we thought, look at this, we've taken ground from God. We're into one of the most well-known venues, these worldly venues, that could possibly be. As we played, there were several musicians, secular musicians. well-known secular musicians that have attended and came. They came backstage, they came on the bus, talked to us and all that. I thought, we really, really won. We really, really won. Years later, God really showed me I didn't win. Satan sent those people in. He sent those people in there to let me know he still had me. You know what? Satan still has many of you. You better look and see if he doesn't have you. He has you by the same way he had me, that music. It was still in me. It was still in my bones. And when they came, I thought it was so good that these musicians that I had went and saw in the last concert before I made a dedication to God in the crater in Hawaii at a big festival had shown up at this event to let me know Satan still had me and he still has you. We were fighting, this whole crossover thing. We went, I would go into New York and we were given the ability to distribute our product through one of the largest, record companies, non-Christian record companies, secular record companies in the world. But we didn't really understand. Along with it came some entrapments. In order for us to do it, they wanted us to release some of the other records. And we thought, oh, sure, that's no problem. The records that were the other records were just records that were totally opposite of what we were trying to strive to preach. There was Satanism. It was just so bad. Yet we had compromised. We had gotten in there. It was a trap. Again, that's all that's happening. You thought you were so wise. You thought you were so good. And the devil constantly was ensnaring you. Constantly ensnaring you. We did a movie track, a soundtrack. I remember going, again, it was in New York, and it was a premiere. And the premiere at the time, we sat down, and they were going to show us the movie. We had done the whole soundtrack. There was a pretty famous band that we had gotten involved with, and the soundtrack. And up on the screen, you saw our label come, soundtrack by, and you thought, here we are, we made it. We crossed over. The music, the movie began to play. It was a total immoral movie. I turned to the gentleman next to me that was my associate and I said, we sold our soul. Look what we've done. It shook us to the bone. God started to bring me out at that point because I started to see really what was going on. How immoral is this thing? It was R-rated, almost X-rated, but we were fighting principalities and powers. It was so... It was so bad. You think about Satan. Satan took Jesus up to the pinnacle and he said, here, you can have all this if you bow down and worship me. But that's what we were doing. We went to the pinnacle and thought we had arrived, only to find out we were worshiping Satan. We were not coming to a point where we were going to be mighty for God. We were diving in under all that demonic roots of rock and roll. I remember going, also, let me go on. I could give you time and time again many things, but you cannot be all things to all people in the physical sense. We used to use the verse in 1 Corinthians 9:22 to justify why we should become like the world, to reach the world. And it said, 1 Corinthians 9:22, to the weak wanting in discernment, I have become weak, that I might win the weak and the over scrupulous. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some by winning them to the faith of Jesus. Paul was referring to the weak, those with the lack of discernment. We were definitely them. We didn't have discernment. He was trying to bring them out of their deception by meeting them where they were in the spirit. Paul wanted to find that place in the heart of man and help them to see the desire of God that God had put there. We did not see the demonic roots of the music that was still in us. We were weak, like Paul referred to. So we were deceived and thought it was okay with that music. We needed people like Paul to help us. I had people like that in my life, and they did help me. The church here was one of the main instruments that helped me come out of that whole demonic roots. Sadly, we thought at that time that music was the drawing power of God that God was using. To think that your music is the drawing power of God is a lie. It's a lie. If people were being drawn by that music, they were opening themselves up to demons. They weren't being drawn to God. It says only God can draw them to him. He says it in John 6:44. No one, understand this, no one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me attracts and draws him and gives him the desire to come to me. And then I will raise him up from the dead at that last day. It's only God that can draw. I mean, the music isn't drawing. God doesn't want you to live in that rock culture. All it is doing is opening you up to demonic forces of that rock culture. You cannot submerge yourself. You can't put yourself in all those places and not think it's not going to affect you. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. I mean, it steals. He says, be sober-minded, be sensitive. Wake up from your spiritual stupor. People, you need to wake up. You need to begin to see what Jesus is saying here, through Paul. I mean, you need to wake up from that spirit. You ought stop sinning. For some of you have no knowledge of God. You are disgracefully ignorant of him and ignore his truths. I say this to your shame. That's what he's saying to you. You ignore the very words of God that he gave you, the very words of God that he drew you to him. As God began, as Paul said, to find that desire in your heart and start to pull you out, you went back in. You chose to do the same things you did before, but only put a Christian name on it. It's not Christian. I'm sorry. It's not Christian. It's not Christian at all. In John 21, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he was asking Simon Peter, where are you really at? Well, you know what? Jesus is asking the same thing to you today. Do you love me more than all of these? Do you love me more than those massive sound systems and light shows? Do you love me more than your tattoos and your shaved heads and your piercings? Do you love me more than your ungodly lifestyle following the sways of this world? Do you love me more than those demonically inspired album covers? Do you love me more than the wicked dress, your immoral presentation? Do you love me more than that worldly image? And the list goes on, and the list goes on. You cannot live between two masters, people. That's what God is saying here today. You have to choose who you will serve. I want to thank you today for being here. I really want you to go back over and listen to what I said. You can come see many of my friends here, 8:30 every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Or you can go to our website, wordoffaithfellowship.org, and visit us, my friends there. You need to come out from among the unbelievers. You need to make a choice today. God is speaking to you. I've carried this message for many, many years. God is speaking to you today. You need to make sure it's piercing your heart. You need to come out from among them today. Thank you.